Hi, good morning. Are there students in Postharvest technology and that too and this too? This school year, we are celebrating the 100 years or the Centennial anniversary of our university. In this regard, I included one of your activity is for you to deliver a message for at least 15 to 20 or sorry 20 to 25 seconds, a video message for you to submit via our messenger or our group chat. Secondly, that video message contains either a pasasalamat or either a greetings for our centennial year. It will be a video for you to send as we celebrate this extraordinary year of our university amidst of this pandemic. So again, your participation is needed and I included that as one of your activity before we will discuss the third module. So today we will be discussing the third module, which includes here the curing process of the root crops and tubers and some harvesting practices. In this chapter, you will be able to learn the different curing techniques of healing wounds of root crops. So a demonstration will be posted in your group chat and will be posted in our YouTube channel and our FB groups once that the weather is favorable. It's rainy season, so I couldn't conduct field curing, but once that the weather is okay, then I will be posting some demonstrations that I will be doing for you to see what is a curing process in healing the wounds of root crops and tubers. In the theoretical side, we will discussing how, what, and what are those process of curing root crops. Okay, so what is curing? So curing is actually a process of toughening or self-healing the bruises of skin areas in root crops and tubers. It means that you were to heal the wounds, okay? Heal the wounds of those root crops that were freshly harvested, given under favorable conditions. So this favorable condition includes here the control of temperature and relative humidity. And as you harvest root crops, hindi may iwasan na magkakaroon ng sugat, and the opening of the wounds is at the portion where we cut or separate the root crop from the mother plant, where microorganisms can attack, and that will now cause rotting for the root crops. Secondly, curing is accomplished only at a given favorable condition. So what is that favorable condition? A favorable condition must be high temperature and high relative humidity for several days. Once that you have high temperature and high relative humidity, curing is very possible for us to heal the wounds and create a new protective layers of cells in those root crops, which we call a sovereign layer. And in this process, root crops can be stored for a longer period of time. So here are some details about curing. Okay, first is you need to consider the environmental factors in setting your curing process. We need here high temperature. So what ranges a high temperature? Must be at least 30 degrees and above, depending upon what particular crop you want to cure. Okay, and high relative humidity, that it means it must have a high moisture content in the atmosphere. Sorry. Okay. So curing root crops, this includes potatoes, sweet potatoes, yam, also bulb and onions are being also cured, no? And in this manner, curing means you were to dry the root crops in order for them to be healed and have a tough layer for the microorganisms not easily to infect the harvested root crops. Okay. Dried tops of plants can be used and arranged to cover the shade bulbs during process, protecting the excessive heat and sunburn. Because sometimes too much exposure to heat and sunlight of those root crops will cause sun-grain to the commodity. In sun-grained commodity or sun-grained root crops are non-marketable already since it has a toxic content of what they call solanine. No? So dried layers of the skin then protect produce from further moisture loss. Most especially during storage, we need to have a thick layer of skin of those root crops. Okay, so how curing is being done? No? So curing is purposively for the following. So these are the purpose of curing. First is for you to lengthen the shelf life of the fresh commodity. As you separate the commodity from the mother plant, then you are creating wounds from the part, we call that the part that connects the root crop to the mother plant. No? So you need to cure them. Okay. Second, you were to heal the wounds of injured and cleaned root crops. And fourth, purposively, curing is for stocking or storing root crops in a longer period of time. So the root crops need to be dried and need to have a strong and thick skin before drying. Most especially if those root crops are purposively for flour, okay, and for food processing. First rule, in curing, never wash your root crops. Why? As you wash your root crops, then you are now causing those you are causing a instead that you are cleaning, then you are causing a more prone root crops for infection, because infection or microorganisms want more moist or more wet commodity. So first step, as you dig the root crops and it is intended for curing, never wash. Don't wash the commodity. Okay, before curing, how can we clean the commodity? Ayan. So you could just remove the soil with the use of your bare hands or use of cloth, but never wash the commodity. And after removing the dirt, then air dried the root crops before curing. Okay, so you were to air dry the root crops before curing. Okay, so the curing duration are very strict and we need to follow, most especially the duration. So for example, Solanum tuberosum or potatoes, it takes 5 to 10 days of a curing process. No? Why do we need to follow the duration? Or we need to follow how many days it would take to cure a certain root crop. Why? Because excessive curing will result to the germination or to the sprouting of the root crop. Second, too much curing will now cause excessive moisture loss. No? So for example, Solanum tuberosum, you were to kept under 15 to 20 degrees Celsius, but relative humidity is very high, 90 to 95%. Ipomea batatas, or that is the kamote, 30 to 32 degrees Celsius, that is a high temperature for sweet potato. Relative humidity is 85 to 90%. Duration, it would take only 4 to 7 days for kamote. Dioscorea alata or Dioscorea rotundata, that is the yam or obe, it would take at least 32 to 40 degrees Celsius, and then 90 to 100 relative humidity or moist of the environment. 1 to 4 days of curing. Okay, we have here the next commodity is we have here the Manihal esculenta, that is the cassava. We have here 30 to 40 degrees Celsius and a high range of relative humidity 90 to 95. So as you can see, it would take an average of 90% of relative humidity. Duration is 2 to 5 days. Santosomat sagitifolium, or that is the gallium, or that is the bila or elephant's ear in English, 25 to 32 degrees centigrade and 80 to 95% relative humidity. 2 to 4 days of curing. Lastly, we have here the Colocasia esculenta, or we have here the taro or the gabi, 20 to 30 degrees Celsius, 85 to 95% relative humidity, and 3 to 5 days of curing. Okay, the most common curing method is field curing. So field curing are used to be conducted in a partially shaded area. If you were to have piles of root crops, just put it in a shaded area and have cut grass. Grasses must be dried, no? And grasses must be dried, okay, and piled under canvas sheet, or you can use mud or you could use tarpaulin, okay. And then curing requires high temperature and high relative humidity to generate heat and moisture. So yun yung purpose po ng grasses and tarpaulin. Lastly, in field curing, it would take only 4 days. So here is a setup that I will be demonstrating to you, given that we have good environmental condition. Okay, so here's the setup, the theoretical setup for field curing. So the root crops are being stacked in piled, okay, in a shaded area, covered it with grasses for at least 6 inches. Grasses that were cut and dried before you were to use it in covering those root crops. And after that, you were to cover the piled root crops, the piled grasses with tarpaulin or with jute bags. But ultimately, tarpaulin is more recommended or to easily generate heat, no? So the purpose of the cut grass, using cut grasses as an insulating material, is to absorb heat coming from the root crops, because these root crops are generating heat, no? And then the use of the tarpaulin is to trap the heat that was being released by the root crops. And then after trapping the heat, the grasses now will create moisture in order for the root crops not to easily dry after the required duration of curing. So ventilated curing is assisted by the use of ventilated sheds, or you have flow of air, no? And produce can be stacked in shade canvas tarpaulins or placed in open-sided shed under one or more ceiling fans, or you have an exhaust fan of that storeroom for you to have ventilation. Okay. So in your stock room, you must have exhaust fan in order for the heat to circulate and air to circulate. Okay, so that's the use of the vent with exhaust fan. The disadvantage of ventilated curing is you have a longer duration of curing process, because the heat that was released by the root crops were being exhausted by the fan and the vent established in your curing area. Okay, curing with heated air is a high-tech form of curing, since you were to establish a heat in the floor and you have an evaporative color introduced, or that is ayun. So an evaporative color is established in the slatted floor, and once that the evaporative color is plugged with electricity, then it would maintain moisture. That's the purpose of the evaporative color. But ultimately, in the slatted floor, the heat that was generated from the root crops are being released and being neutralized by the evaporative color. Okay, so bulk system of curing, it just only requires a fan and a heating unit in a slatted floor. So that image shows a bulk system of curing, most especially if you have a very high volume of produce, no? So you have there a vent, and then you have there a floor which was installed with a heater. Okay. So emergency curing today is a rainy season, and because a common farmer could not buy a ventilator, could not buy a heated slatted floor, no? Because most of our root crop farmers here in the Philippines are medium scaled, no? Unless for those producing flour, kailangan talaga ng ventilated ventilated rooms, okay? Evaporative color and a heated slatted floor to conduct curing. But for a small volume of root crops, an emergency curing and field curing could be done, no? But field curing could not be done during this rainy season. So emergency curing is applied nowadays or during this rainy season. So if conditions such as rain or flooded do not permit field curing or any curing facilities are not available, a temporary tent can be used for curing your root crops like onions. Ayan. So you will just establish a simple shed area and then pile the root crops, covered it with grasses and with canvas sheet. Okay? So we have here the curing schedule. As you can see in the graph, in the x-axis, you have there the temperature. You have in the y-axis, you have there the temperature. In the x-axis, you have there the time or the duration. As you can see, the duration, the more time consumed during curing, the faster the wilting occurs. So 48 hours, that is approximately 2 days. So ultimately, you need to follow the curing duration. Baka kasi makalimutan mo na may na-cure kang root crops and lumampas ka sa duration schedule, then sprouting of the root crops could occur. Sprouting and excessive wilting and drying of the commodity. Okay? So, you need to follow the duration of the curing process. Okay, so we have now the third quiz. So, quiz number 3. We have here 4 questions. Okay, we have here 4 questions. So this rainy season, what particular curing method will be applied on the root crops, bulb, and onions harvested? Kindly furtherly explain your choice. Second question, how does heat and moisture being generated during the curing process? Why do we need to pay attention on the duration or schedule of curing root crops? Third question, in field curing, why do we need to follow the layers of setting and dried grasses and canvas sheet like tarpaulin in covering root crops, bulb, or onions? And lastly, what are the do's and don'ts in curing root crops? Okay, so here is your activity number 2. So this year, 2020, Ifugao State University celebrates its Centennial or 100th Foundation anniversary amidst the adversity brought by this pandemic. Kindly send your video message, either that is greetings, thank you, or salutation. Guidelines of making your activity number 2, 20 to 25 seconds duration of your video message. Have body capture of the video if possible while delivering your message. Send your output via messenger or email. Thank you very much and have a nice day.